Hi, friends. So, right now, I want to address a very, very important topic. Whenever I talk about hypnotherapy, and I've been talking about this for many, many years, I've been practicing hypnotherapy for 25 years. I've certified over 3,000 students. I've been talking about this quite a bit for many years, right? Whenever we talk about this with the public, there are always questions about the safety and efficacy of hypnosis. By that I mean, is it safe? Is it dangerous? And efficacy meaning, will it work? Can that actually happen? You know. Now, the question about efficacy of hypnosis, unfortunately, hypnosis is extremely operator dependent. It isn't something that, I mean, look, I'll be honest with you, there are electronic devices nowadays that will hypnotize you better than a lot of hypnotists. It's just the truth, because it takes quite a bit of skill to hypnotize somebody. We're all on guard. It takes skill. And so, you know, so what happens is a lot of people say, look, it's not efficacious, it's not working, but that's because they don't know how to hypnotize. I've been in this situation a bunch of times. A person will tell me this person is resistant to hypnosis. I come in the room and they go right into the hypnotic state. In other words, it's really, really, really operator and skill dependent. And the truth is that most people in our culture want, very quick results. They don't take the time to learn, to develop the skill necessary to actually hypnotize. No criticism there. I'm just saying, if somebody tells you, look, it doesn't work, most likely the hypnotist you went to see hadn't yet developed the skills necessary. Because I'm telling you, the hypnotists who've been doing this for a while and really get it, they can do things that the only way people can define it is magic. It seems like magic. It seems like magic. It's that good, right? So I've seen that myself, and therefore, you know, I can tell you it's just as I'm saying, but it is operator dependent, it is skill dependent, much more so than other areas of life. I'll give you an example: surgery. Every surgery out there has a procedure written down. This is, and they have names. This is how you do this surgery: retract the liver, do this, pull out this, ligate this artery, whatever. So there's a set of procedures, and there are better surgeons than others, and they do get different results, different death rates, different morbidity rates, different mortality rates, different complication rates, right? Different amounts of medications after surgery are needed for different surgeons. So when you compare a bunch of surgeons, they don't all get the same results for the same surgery, but the variation between the best and the worst is much smaller. The variation between the best and the worst hypnotherapist is as much as nothing happened all the way to it changed my life forever. You see, the gap between the two ends of the extremes is much, much wider for something like hypnosis, in part because the training programs are somewhat ununiform. Medical education is a lot more uniform. All right, having said that, um, the question of efficacy, I can assure you that if you actually want to change something and you do find a hypnotherapist who is actually skilled, it will be efficacious. But then you have this other question of safety. Am I safe? Well, it turns out that when you ask large groups of people, is hypnosis safe? What do you think about hypnosis? People, people, when people express objection to hypnosis, they lump those objections into a few categories. One category is, well, I don't know what's going to happen to me once I go into hypnosis. What is this person going to do to me? So we call this fear of the hypnotist, right? Is it possible that as I go into hypnosis, this person attacks me? Well, if this person attacks me, we're not. And by the way, when was the last time you heard of that happening? It doesn't really happen, but whatever. If that were to happen, we're not really dealing with a problem with hypnosis. We're dealing with a criminal behavior. We're dealing with assault, with battery, with sexual assault, right? Whatever the case might be. It's not really a hypnosis problem. It's a different kind of problem. It's a it's a violent criminal behavior that really has not hypnosis happened to be one component of that encounter, but it's really not a hypnosis problem that made that happen. So whatever. So that has been argued in court in different cases. I have a book here somewhere that talks about a bunch of attempts to criminalize hypnosis, and then nothing happens because it's not true. It didn't, criminal behavior is criminal behavior independently of hypnosis. Okay, so fear of the hypnotist. Clearly, there are car mechanics who are criminals, there are medical doctors, there are engineers, there are accountants, in other words, the profession of hypnotism has nothing to do with the one or two people who may be criminally minded and may want to harm you. They could have belonged to other professions as well. So that idea, fear of the hypnotist, it doesn't really hold too much water. Of course, do your due diligence. Look at the person's credentials. How long have they been practicing? Do they have problems consistently? In other words, who is this person, right? Okay, fine. So let's suppose that you get past that and past that fear of the hypnotist. Okay, what about people say, well, what if I lose control? Well, what does that mean if I lose control? You know, the real issue, the real fear with hypnosis is that we strip away the masks. The problem is not the hypnotist. People ask me, oh, but what if you make me quack like a dog? What if you make me bark like a dog? Really? When was the last time you were walking down the street and you saw a person quacking like a duck, and then you ask him, why you're quacking like a duck? And they said, because I went to see a hypnotist who made this come on. The real issue here is that the masks come off. We all wear a mask. We all, to one extent or another, we all wear a mask. And if the cat is out of the bag, what do I do then? In other words, if I'm living a fake life because I think that somehow that is good for me, I'm taking advantage of somebody and I believe it benefits me. I go into hypnosis, I see that the cat is out of the bag. How do I go back to my fake life now? And you might say, well, I'm not living a fake life. And I'm not saying you are. I'm giving you an example. The cat's out of the bag. It's very difficult to go back to our lives once the mask comes off. Now, in some ways, we're all wearing a mask because physicality itself is a huge mask. We're all wearing an avatar suit, like in the movies, to interact with this world here, but we are not the body. We're not. And when we put this suit on, and we call that birth, we adopt a certain set of ideas that allow me to survive in this environment that we call life in the world. But that's not the real me. That's not the real you. So if you go into a deep enough state of hypnosis, you see that difference. You see the animal that we have become to survive, and you see the true identity of who you are. And I don't use the word animal offensively here. I mean, I'm wearing the same suit, right? In other words, I'm simply explaining animal in the sense that, the physicality in us, the physical part of us is after survival. Survival has to do with eating, with reproducing, so those basic drives, they drive us in that part of us. But there's more to us than all of that. So if I believe this is what I am, and now I go into deep hypnosis and I see that I'm not really that, well, the cat is out of the bag. And now it becomes a matter of like sorting things out. And so the true problem with hypnosis is that it actually works. That's the true problem. Listen, you may have heard of a man over 100 years ago called Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was a medical doctor, graduated in 1866 from the University of Vienna in Austria, which at the time was way more prestigious, relatively speaking, than graduating from Harvard today. I'm not saying that Harvard is not a prestigious institution. I'm just saying that relative to the world back then, Vienna was a bigger deal than anything else in the world at that time. The world is much more global nowadays, so there are other universities. Back then, Vienna was it. He graduates from the most prestigious university as a medical doctor. He was not a fool. He was not, Freud was not, people say later that he was, whatever. That's not true. He was a very intelligent scientist who was very dedicated to the cause of mental illness. And one of the problems that he was interested in solving was neurosis. Neurosis is not a term that we use anymore in medicine, but is a term that they used back then. And it essentially has to do with like a mental addiction, repetitive behaviors or a certain way of being. And he wanted to fix that. He wanted to find a cure for that problem. At first, he thought that specific ways of using cocaine might work out. And people tell me, oh, how stupid, you're such an addict. How can you use cocaine to solve that? Dude, please, if you're not into medicine, don't say that, because we want to be careful with what we say. Look, nowadays, the best of the best, we use a substance very similar to cocaine chemically. It's not the same thing, but it's very similar to deal with attention deficit disorder. So we use a stimulant. That's exactly what he was doing over 100 years ago, using a stimulant to stimulate a certain part of the brain to get people to behave differently. We do the exact same thing today. You have a kid who is hyperactive, we give him Ritalin, which is chemically similar to cocaine, which is a stimulant which stimulates the part of the brain that causes you to slow down behavior. It's like pressing on the brake pedal in order for the kid to slow down a little bit. That's exactly what we're doing today, over 100 years later. So this strategy is very intelligent. And today you go to a psychiatrist, a medical doctor, say, my kid has ADD. They give you the same type of stimulant, and we applaud all of that. That same person leaves that office and ridicules Dr. Freud 100 years ago for using cocaine for neurosis. Please, let's be a bit more careful. We're doing the same thing 100 years later. In other words, if Freud made a mistake using cocaine for neurosis, we can excuse that on the basis that it was over 100 years ago and we didn't know any better. But over 100 years have elapsed. And the best solution we have for certain problems is the same thing that he was doing back then. So whenever I hear a person criticizing Dr. Freud, I'm not pro-Freud or anti-Freud. I just say, dude, we gotta study a little bit of history. We can't. You have to learn a little bit about what you're saying before you say it. So, yeah, over 100 years have elapsed, and that's still the best solution we have for certain problems. So he wasn't all that wrong, and yet, from what we know, they were not able to cure neurosis using cocaine. So Dr. Freud and his associates, Breuer and other people, were looking for other solutions to the neurosis problem. And the world was very different back then. There was no internet, and communicating with other scientists was very difficult and slow. But there was the equivalent of an internet in the sense that there were ways in which the scientists would communicate. Usually, well, you had libraries where people would deposit knowledge. You also had the conferences, or what they called societies back then. So the Royal Society of Science, the Royal Society of Chemists. They had societies, and societies were essentially where they would hold meetings, right? So it would be what you and I would call today a conference. So if you were a person that worked in that area, you would be a member of that society, and you would attend a meeting potentially once a year or something, in which meeting they would discuss all of the latest ideas and so forth. So communication among scientists did happen, albeit way slower than today. Today you publish something on the internet, the whole world finds out. Back then it might have taken a few years, but they had the equivalent. They had ways of communicating. So Dr. Freud becomes aware of Dr. Jean-Martin Charcot in France. He worked at this Altre-Pierre hospital just outside of Paris, another very prestigious institution. And Charcot, was curing neurosis with this thing called hypnosis, which had been known already for thousands of years. So Freud goes to France and becomes a student of Charcot, and learns how to hypnotize. When he comes back to Germany, to Austria, he becomes a hypnotist. He no longer wants to do experiments with chemicals. He wants to work with hypnosis, and he becomes a very good hypnotist, and he's hypnotizing people for years. That's what he's doing now. Eventually, he abandons hypnosis and develops a new technique that came to be known as free association, later developed into something called psychoanalysis. So when he goes through this transition of hypnosis to psychoanalysis or free association, the question is why. And he wrote a paper on this, and he says that, and he lists three objections, one of which is, well, it doesn't always work. Well, nothing always works. Then he says, well, sometimes the problem goes away, but it comes back. Well, guess what? So does hunger. So does shower taking. I'm dirty today. I take a shower. Tomorrow I got to take another shower. Things come back, right? I mean, that's, you take medication today. Tomorrow you have a headache again. That's not a reason to abandon a technique. But he lists that reason. And then he lists a third reason that to this date intrigues me. I wish I could sit down with him and ask him what he meant by that. And he says that there's something mystical about hypnosis. And it's true. It's very powerful. It's very intense. It's mystical. It's magical. And therefore, it takes a while to learn to do it. So he wanted to do something much more mundane, something that we call nowadays manualized therapy, something that I can follow a manual and apply, and is going to work the same for everybody. Well, hypnosis is not manualized. It's not a cookie cutter. It takes a lot of skill on the part of the operator. So it's not as profitable. It's not as, it's a different kind of procedure, but it's way more effective because it can reach the core of the person. So Ernst Mach had written a paper, the turn of the century, last turn of the century, saying that science would evolve to the extent that they were able to separate themselves from religion, spirituality, mysticism, because way back when in the 18th century, science was still very much merged with religion. What we call science today used to be called natural philosophy. All of these things were one thing, and gradually they separated and split and took on different directions. And so the scientists of the 19th century recognized that if they kept on discussing spiritual ideas, they wouldn't really go anywhere. It wouldn't really grow. The very scientific method was an attempt to separate science from religion so they could evolve. And so now, come to find out, hypnosis has this undertone of mysticism and power and spirituality and all of these things. And they say, no, we got to get rid of that. Let's do something much more scientific, free association, psychoanalysis. So I tell you all of these historical facts to impress upon you the fact that, yeah, of course it works. Of course it's extremely powerful. Of course it's going to transform your life. And of course it is something that you need to think about if you want or not, but it is that powerful. And finally, I'll say one more and last thing about objections to hypnosis. I have never seen a person in my years as a hypnotist, I have never seen a person who can hypnotize legitimately object to hypnosis. Everybody I've seen criticizing or objecting to hypnosis, everyone, zero exception, is unable to hypnotize. They have all kinds of reasons why it's not good for you, but they cannot do it. And whatever reasons they have to criticize hypnosis is perhaps what they wish they could do, but they can't. Because the person who takes the time to learn how to do this, they discover that they've had to change. And the change a person needs to undergo to be able to hypnotize properly involves, among other things, purging from our system even the thought of harming another human being. So people who are focused on the harms of hypnosis, they're focused on the harm. And as a result, they could never hypnotize you. So that's why all they talk about is the harm. The people who actually can hypnotize you, it wouldn't even occur to them. It's just not a part of their thinking. So again, I want to motivate you, if you're contemplating using hypnotherapy as a service with your friendly neighborhood hypnotherapist, to do your research, to find out a little bit more. Call me if you have any questions. I'll be more than happy to help and answer questions by all means. But do your due diligence, because it is potentially the one thing that's going to change your life for the better forever, as it has changed mine and thousands of other people I've worked with and other people that I haven't worked with, but I know of. It can totally change your life for the better. So, you know, mega blessings to you. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm here to assist. Thank you.